I have a very strong feeling for everything that grows, but I'm most in awe of trees. I refer to them as the quintessential material. Well, it's wood to begin with. They contain fire, they transpire air, they transform water into water vapor, and they're rooted in the earth. So they really embody the 5 elements, and I think that's why I find them so endlessly inspiring. The natural form has a lot of visual cues of its own. It has its own structure, its own cellular structure. I would be a fool to not work with it because, all woodworkers know you have to pay attention to grain, but there's the nature of the piece, and then there's my little will working on it. I don't want to exist in some kind of creative vacuum where it's just me and the piece and nothing else matters. So I do think about the viewer. I do try very hard to engage and spark their imagination, to have their eye look into the piece, to draw them in. The cultural context is tremendously important. And I'm leaving a little archive. It's a record of a time and a person, and a story that, frankly, isn't told that much by women in wood. We're in the great northern Appalachian forest complex that runs all along the eastern seaboard. The woods that grow around here are generally maple, and that could be sugar maple, but it could also be red maple, cherry, which is wild cherry, walnut, and butternut, although butternut is disappearing, yellow birch, white birch, and basswood. There's some very nice logic of having a tree. It has leaves, you cut it down, you cut it into wood, you turn it, you do all this stuff to it, and then for me, it's almost like returning the leaves to the wood. So what I might do here is use that as the midrib of the leaf, let's say an oak leaf that has lobes, and I would lay out the lobes like that. In a case like this, I would use this air tool. It's called a pencil grinder. It turns very fast. I'd use it to rough out this form, to create the mass of the form, but when I'm close to where I want it to be, I really love an X-Acto knife and a 100-pack of replacement blades. I began carving in high school. I had a wonderful teacher named Mrs. Blake. She showed us how to make frescoes on plaster. There was a kiln. We used clay. It was an incredibly wonderful program. And at one point, she gave us linoleum blocks and the carving tools to make block prints. And I realized that I really loved carving. Mrs. Blake gave me my first set of carving tools. I still have them. I still use them. I think along the way, there were many, many people who I've found or who have found me who have just supported me tremendously, foremost of whom would be David.
It's a lot like cutting jewels, because even though you have a sense of what's on the inside, you don't really know until you cut into it, and then you see what you've got. We'll bring the tractor around, because these are obviously way too big to move any other way. We'll take them piece by piece and put them in our lower wood drying shed. And I won't use these for 4 or 5 years. So I have to keep that far ahead. Some people will find something that they love to do, and they'll go anywhere to do that thing. And other people find a place that they want to be and then figure out what they have to do to stay there. And for Michelle and me, it was the latter. The longer we stayed here, the deeper that understanding of the topography and of the botany of the area, the nature of the trees around here and their life cycles and their behaviors, their characteristics became an important aspect of our experience of wood and our experience of working wood. The sawmills want straight trees that they can saw out for 2x4s and for flooring and things like that. But what Michelle and I use are the things that are junk to the industry. There might be a burl up in a yellow birch tree. Nobody wants that.
A burl is a growth on a tree that's often caused at the site of a wound of some sort. It doesn't really hurt it, it just grows along with the tree. But it does cause the grain, instead of growing straight, to start growing irregularly. So these very concentric and eccentric grain patterns develop. This piece also has like discoloration from water damage. It has these little black lines referred to as spalting that are mineral deposits. I mean, there's a lot going on. This tree had a lot of stuff happening to it. I like working with burl because it has a lot of personality to begin with. In a sense, I have two different ways of working. One where I'll choose a material that has a lot of personality. Then I'm having a bit of a dialogue with it and trying to suit the form, to suit the reality of the material. But occasionally, I want to have my own way with a form. And that's when I'll choose a very bland piece of wood like basswood that doesn't talk back at all. Taking one's cues from the physiology of the wood as you find it, a lot of it is getting out of your own way. You know, turning me down and letting that wood speak a little bit more loudly. Then suddenly that's when I start realizing that the wood has a lot to say and that I'm just translating it almost. Sometimes people say to me, "You must be so patient. How do you do it? You're spending days in your shop looking down at this piece." That comes extremely naturally to me. It harkens back to my hands' first training, drawing with a pencil and sewing. My mother was a great seamstress and taught me and all of my sisters how to sew. We had to master just the needle and thread and make even, small, perfect stitches. That was very important training for my eye and my hand, and also that inner focus that you need to just do repetitive work and do it well. My father was a tool and die maker. He was building cabinets, and when it got time to buy hardware, he looked at all the hardware and thought, this is all crap. There's no way I'm going to buy this. I'm going to make my own hardware. So he put the lathe together. Because it was made to turn metal, there's all kinds of calibrations on here, so it's really made for fairly high precision work. I'm not in charge of holding that tool. The tool holder holds it. All I have to do is turn these two handles. It's like using an Etch-a-Sketch. It took me a while to figure out how to do both at the same time, but it is unusual. It's not a wood lathe, and in a way, I'm not a turner's turner.
Michelle's ability to visualize a three-dimensional form in a solid mass of wood is astounding to me. I can't understand how she can do that, how she can take like a reunion bowl. She can carve this large bowl that's also attached to 5 spoons, all a single piece of wood. Or the brocaded pillow with a wooden bowl stuck down into it, but is a single piece of wood.
Undines, my father comes into that piece because that is kind of a highly engineered piece. The central piece was that canteen form, and then I turned 2 cherry burl bowl forms, a sort of lattice, and attached them. Meanwhile, in the interior of that cherry vase, I carved 2 mermaids. I didn't carve them separately and then put them back in. I carved them within that center mass. They're looking at each other, that they're reaching around each other. It's a very intimate piece, and I really do acknowledge my father and his work and his mind. I inherited some aspect of his mind, which is that ability to like see a three-dimensional form in your mind, rotate it in your mind, and then work on it.
For her, it's like she's trying to figure out a problem. Once she's figured that problem out, she'll do a couple, say, okay, I've got that, and then she goes on to find the next problem. She's always been a tireless explorer.
I consider this piece to be a bit of a self-portrait. I made it at a time when I was feeling somewhat constrained. You know, I guess in any field, you get known for doing certain work, and there's pressure to continue doing that work. And sometimes a good way to work through those conflicts is through the work. This particular book was carved from one piece of wood. The covers, I used the wood burning tool to get this very dark color. For the pages, after carving them, I used wood bleach. It bleaches the color out of the wood and makes it have sort of a suede, papery texture. It's just a perfect surface for drawing on with the wood burning tool as well. And this book at the bottom, if you look at the spine, you can see it says Gulliver's Travels, so giving a nod to the original. This piece was strangely fun to make, though. There's something about tying something up like that that's, I don't know, strangely satisfying. When I came up here to go to Marlborough College in 1969, when I was 17, I remember driving up the hill and just feeling like in my chest, I thought, I am home. There was something about the mountains, about the forests, and even about the winter. Here especially, I think people think in terms of their homesteads. They use that word homestead, and it means it's the place, it's a locus not where you just go to live and sleep. It's a locus of economic activity. And many people here make their living in one way or another off the land upon which they live. And I think that back to the land movement was just this notion that you could be connected in that way. And I feel like it's where humans are most satisfied.